Hi there. I'm going to do a sword review on two different swords today. One sword is from Dark Sword Armory, and the other sword is from Ronin Katana. So let's just dive into it. The first sword I'm going to talk about is this sword right here. This is Dark Sword Armory's rendition of the Black Prince sword. It's a Type 15A long sword. It has an overall length of 50 inches with a blade length of 39 inches. It weighs 3 pounds 2 ounces and has a point of balance of about 3.75 inches below the guard. It's pretty good. It comes with this really nice scabbard. Scabbard is, I'll talk about the scabbard first. Scabbard is pretty good leather quality. It's got some nice embellishments. It's not as amazing as some kind of bespoke scabbard that you could purchase. But for a scabbard that comes with the sword, this is pretty nice. It's got an integrated belt system. And the price on this sword is, what I paid for it anyway, was $600, including the shipping. I've seen these priced for sort of $50 in either end of that spectrum. The sword came sharpened. The belt system that comes with the scabbard, even though it looks really nice, is about 50 to 75 years too early for this particular sword. This sword would be used in the mid to late 15th or 14th century and on into the middle of the 15th century. The belt system that comes with the scabbard, again, even though it's really cool, it's probably mid to late 13th century. You wouldn't have a belt system quite like this. It'd be kind of an antique. But it looks really cool and I like it. So let's talk about the sword. This is a very nice looking sword. It's like a lot of Dark Sword Armory blades, is hollow ground, which piqued my fancy. I think it looks cool, and it kind of made me want to buy the sword actually. The blade itself and most of the fittings are fairly mirror polished. It's not completely mirror polished, but it's pretty close. It's nicely done. The polish is even all the way down to the tip, and it's even across the crossguard and the pommel. There are no unfinished edges. I'll start in the pommel and work my way down. So, actually, before I say that, I'm going to say that this sword is really well balanced. This is a well balanced weapon. I have an arming sword that is about, from the pommel to the blade tip, about a foot shorter than this, and it weighs probably 1.5 pounds less, and this weapon feels more nimble in my hand, even one-handed, than my arming sword. It's kind of amazing. Partly, I think it's because this handle is very long, and it's got a big whopping wheel pommel on here. The wheel pommel I like. There's no sharp edges on here. There's nothing that's going to cause a hot spot. It has a raised portion at the very back of the sword where the peen is. The peen is a little bit too proud. It could be probably ground down a bit. But that being said, it's pretty well done. This grip, this red leather grip does not come with the sword. I added this on here. The grip that came with the sword is completely serviceable. It's completely fine. It's black leather wrapped around a cord around what I take to be a wooden core around the tang. I added this mainly because I've got some arthritis in this hand and in this hand, and I need a sword handle that's slightly larger. So that's the only reason why this is on here. It's nothing against the sword. It's just that my hands need a little bit more purchase. The crossguard is a pentagon. At first glance, it may look like a rectangular crossguard, but it's actually a pentagon. It's got a ridge running down this edge here and this edge here. Quillions are nice and simple. It's a very simple crossguard, very elegant crossguard. The main issue I have with this sword is where the blade enters into, see if I can see this here, right there. It's a pretty big gaposis. Now the blade does go all the way through, all the way in there. It just doesn't hang outside, which is good. But it's a big gaposis. So, maybe it's because trying to create a a scalloped opening for the hologram blade, because this blade is hologram all the way to the end. Maybe that's difficult or problematic, I don't know. But if I had to offer any advice to Dark Sword, I'd say, hey, get this a little tighter. So I'm just going to say right now, the only two issues I have with this sword is this and the peen. Other than that, I can't find anything wrong with this sword. I asked for it to come sharpened, and I know that this is a mid-price range sword, as is the Ronin Katana. They're not upper price range. They're not Lockwood swords. They're not Albion swords, and so mid-range swords often have sharpness issues. I know DSA has had some complaints that some of their swords don't come necessarily too sharpened. I can tell you, when I got this out of the box, I ran my thumb down the blade to see if it was sharpened, and I cut myself. And I was not pressing too hard. So I don't know, maybe I got the best DSA sword they make, or I'm assuming that this is the typical product that they sell people. Anyway, I think the sharpness is totally fine. Out of the box, I was able to go outside and cut pop bottles in half and some pool noodles and hack some wood. No edge deformation at all. No marks on it. The blade is held up. I've had it for about 2 months now, and it looks brand new, even though it's been put through its paces. Again, I think that the balance of the sword is amazing. It just does not feel like 3 pounds and 2 ounces. And I think that's amazing. 3 pounds, 2 ounces for a 50-inch sword, I think is pretty cool. It's accomplished by the hologram, which is removing weight off the blade. It's a pretty stiff blade. The point of percussion is right about there. Anyway, I think it's pretty cool. So, well done, Dark Sword Armory. As far as its historical authenticity to the sword that has been attributed to the Black Prince, even though that the bona fides of that particular article is not 100% by any means. This one, because other manufacturers make a Black Prince sword, this probably is. It's not totally as close to the mark as maybe some of the others. This is a longer sword, I think. The handle is longer, but it makes up for the lack of complete historical authenticity in that it is really fun to hold and move around, and it just is nice. So overall, I think it's awesome. Blade edge geometry is very, very good. There's some a little bit of wrinkles, but that's to be expected as the hand-forged blade is not CNC'd. It's made of 5160 steel, and both edges are equal, and the midline looks good all the way down. I think it's just a really well-made sword. And it comes with this kick-ass scabbard that's wooden core scabbard. It's got a nice metal steel chip in the end. And even though the belt system is 50 to 75 years too early, I will not take it off because I just think that the look of it is really nice. Anyway, so that is the Dark Sword Armory Type 15A longsword, the Black Prince sword that I paid $600 for. The next sword is from Ronin Katana. Now, I wanted a Type 18C sword, and there are several manufacturers out there, like the ones that make this kind of sword, that make 18C blades. I went with the Ronin Katana because I've never owned a Ronin Katana, and it was less expensive than the Dark Sword Armory version of the same type of weapon, and it's far less expensive than the Albion version. This too comes with a scabbard and a belt system. Now, unlike the DSA belt system, it's not integrated into the scabbard. The DSA belt is actually interwoven into the scabbard, which is very historically accurate as far as I can tell. This one is not, and I'm kind of glad that it's not, because I intend to put a more accurate belt system on this, so I don't have to worry about pulling stuff out of the scabbard, and there's not going to be a bunch of slits in the leather. That being said, this scabbard is a ho-hum scabbard. It's okay. The DSA scabbard, its stitching is on the back end of it. It's on the back, runs right down the back of the scabbard. The Ronin Katana is on the edge. That kind of bothers me. I think it would be better if it was over towards the middle. It would be more accurate that way. It's got a nice steel shape on it. But you can see where when they put the chape on, they sort of shoved it on there, and it got a lot of wrinkling going on here with the leather. So I think that's kind of bogus. This sword was retailed for $425, including the shipping in my hand. So it's less expensive than the DSA sword, but they're both basically mid-range swords. Both Ronin Katana and Dark Sword primarily make mid-range swords. Dark Sword does make some higher and at least more expensive swords. I don't know if they're any better, but they're certainly more expensive. The Blackburn sword is kind of middle of the road for their prices. This is very middle of the road too for Ronin Katana. It's $425. Anyway, so the scabbard is nothing to write home about, so I'm done talking about the scabbard. It's a wood core scabbard. It holds the blade. There's a little bit of rattle, probably more than the D is. Yeah, there's no rattle in this one at all. So anyway, let's talk about the sword. Like all 18C swords, this is a broad sword. It is a broad blade. Unlike the DSA sword, this is not hollow ground. It's just a simple diamond cross section. For competition cutting, people tend to like 18C blades with narrow diamond cross sections. I think it seems to be that is the sort of choice for doing competition cutting. I think perhaps, not being a scientist, but perhaps a very narrow, broad, diamond-shaped blade offers the best ability to cut through any kind of material because the angle of attack is so narrow. Between these two blades, this blade is probably easier to cut through stuff than the DSA sword, even though I think on the edge to edge, I think they're about the same, almost exactly the same out of the box. But the DSA sword has that hologram. I think the hologram might impede cutting a little bit because the surface geometry from the edge to the midline of the sword is more complicated, whereas this one is just a straight angle from here. There's on both swords, I don't see any secondary edge. They're both really good. Point of balance on this sword, now, it's about 7.5 to 8 inches from the guard, which is not horrible, but it's not great. So this has, I guess you would say, blade presence, and that's a charitable way of saying this is a heavy sword to wield. This sword weighs 3 pounds 8 ounces, and it's made of 1075 steel. There's a total overall length of 44 3/4 inches, and again, it weighs 3 pounds 8 ounces. So this weighs 6 ounces more than the other sword I just talked about, yet this feels in the hand like it must weigh at least another pound. It feels heavy. It's not unwieldy, but wielding it with one hand is not nearly as fun as the other sword. But with 2 hands is totally fine. Starting from the pommel all the way to the end, the pommel on the sword is diminutive. If you compare the pommel on the DSA sword with the pommel on the Ronin Katana, it is just that the Ronin Katana there's just not a lot of beef there, and not a lot of metal there. It's got an inset, unfinished section on either side. I suppose you could put something in there. I don't know, but it's kind of small. If you look at the specs from one of the Alexandria swords that this sword is really mimicking, if Ronin Katana had made this sword to the same specifications, particularly from the guard to the pommel, the tang, even though it's the right length, would have been a few millimeters thicker, and this pommel would have been considerably larger. If I would give any advice to Ronin Katana, I would say make the steel thicker through the tang, maybe make the handle maybe an inch longer, and make this pommel a whopping bit bigger. And then the balance issue would probably go away. But that's not how they did it. So the other thing I have about this, the other issue I kind of have with this particular pommel, it's another wheel pommel. First of all, the peen is great. Unlike the DSA sword where it was a little bit too proud and was sort of catchy, this one is nice and smooth. But even though it's really nice and smooth, there's an awful lot of sharp, not sharp edges you're going to cut yourself, but edges that are going to provide a nice hot spot unless you're wearing a glove. Like if I was going to use this for any length of time, I'd want a glove. I want gloves because this is going to chew up your hand. This one I have not put another wrap on, only because I've only had this for a week and I haven't had a chance to. But I'm going to probably put another wrapping of leather on this one too, just for my arthritis. The handle itself is good. It's good leather, nice quality. It's not too sticky. It's not too. Put it on pause for a second. Dogs. Anyway, so the leather is good quality. This one has stitching along the edge of the handle, and this is another issue I have with this sword, is that the stitching is thick. You can definitely see the stitching, but it's a bit too proud. It sticks up a bit, and I can definitely feel it. So I guess there's nothing wrong with it. I guess aesthetically, to me, it would be nicer if it was a little bit less. If it was just a little bit less proud. The crossguard is an octagon. It's not as beefy as the DSA, but aesthetically it looks nice. It does the job. Whereas the DSA sword had a big bunch of gaposes between the blade and the guard here, there's no gaposes here at all. It's nice. It's nice and so you can see that in there. It goes right in there. Blade is recessed in as it should be, and there's no gaposes. The blade is not mirror polished. It's probably on the upper end of satin. Maybe just fingerprints all over it. I can see polishing marks on the blade though, whereas the DSA sword is a lot more even. This one I can see where the buffer's been on it. I can see the midline on the sword. It's not super pronounced, but it's there, and it's even. There's a little bit of wrinkling, but not bad. And I don't see any kind of secondary edge on this that I can see. Again, out of the box, this came sharpened, and it was sharp. I think it was probably as sharp as the DSA sword. So, could they be sharper? Probably. I have not, using them to do some test cutting outside. I haven't done tatami mats, but I have done, like say pop bottles, pool noodles, and pieces of wood and stuff like that. I haven't hit any metal or bricks, so I'm not going to destroy these swords. Anyway, both of them are totally serviceable. They both work. They both slice through things as you'd want swords to do. Edge geometry is another issue I have with the sword, where this edge here is true from the guard all the way to the point. A nice line. This side is ever so slightly scalloped in about here. About here, it dips in slightly. And yeah, this side's fine. This side, it dips in. And there's a little bit of surface irregularity right here that I can see on the blade. So I think if this sword was going to fail, which I'm not going to destroy it or anything, but I think if I had to make a prediction, if this sword was going to fail, it would fail right here. Because I can see a little surface imperfection, and that's right where the blade dips in. And I mean, it's really slight. It's maybe a millimeter from the whole length, but I can see it with my eye. Anyway, so that's the DSA sword. Again, $425 with the sword and the scabbard and the belt system. So the question is, value for the money? What do I think? I think that if you want a Type 18C sharp sword, the Ronin Katana is definitely your price if you're price conscious, this is the one for you. This is much less expensive than the Albion version. Albion makes, I believe, 2 different versions of that. And there's some other manufacturers that also make a 18C blade. They're all way more expensive than this. I am a firm believer that you usually get what you pay for. So I would expect an Albion to be superior in quality to this. But that being said, this is fun to cut with. It's a beautiful looking sword, with a few exceptions. There's probably, you know, each part of this sword, other than the crossguard, has some issues. But you know, is it worth $425? I think it probably is. Just because you're not going to get a sword like this that you can actually do anything with, unless you're going to spend double or more what you're going to be spending. Actually, you know, but like 3 times what you're going to be spending on this. So, anyway, for the dark sword, I would say, wow, this is a good value. Other than, I mean, the only issues I have with this entire project here is the peen and the gaposis in the guard. Other than that, I don't find anything wrong with this sword. It's great. If you want a Type 15A longsword, and you've got $600 to spend, I would think this is a good sword to get. It's fun. It's light in hand, and it seems to be very well made. I've cut lots of stuff with it over the past couple months, and I have yet to hear anything rattle around or anything. It's still nice and solid, and the blade looks just like it came out of the box. There you go. Thanks for watching.